Hi, everyone. This is Rohit from Rights and Mastery, and today I'm excited to have Elizabeth MacBride, who's an award-winning business journalist whose work has been published in Forbes Magazine, Newsweek, HBR, and many others. Elizabeth often writes about investing, entrepreneurship, and industrial business. She has a journalism degree from the University of Maryland, where she was an editor-in-chief of the Diamondback, and an MFA in nonfiction from George Mason University. I have another great guest, Seth Levine, who is the founder of Foundry Group, which is a Boulder-based early stage venture capital firm specializing in technology and internet-related investments. He's also the founder of Pledge 1%, and both Elizabeth and Sid are the co-authors of the new book, The New Builders Face to Face with the True Future Business. Welcome to the show, Sid and Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you, Rohit.
Awesome. You've been into journalism, and it's like you've been into the VC world. What made you write the book? What got you interested to write this book right
now? So as you said, I've been a journalist for a long time, and met Seth through that work. He was investing in a company, in a fund in Palestine, and I was doing some work there for the United Nations. And so we met and stayed in touch because we have a shared passion, I think, for the idea that entrepreneurship can really be a tool for personal agency and for equitable economic development. So we stayed in touch, and then a few years ago, I dropped into Boulder. We chatted and came up with the idea to do this book.
Interesting. And the book is about the new builders, and do you really think that entrepreneurship is dying these days? There's been a lot of funding which has happened across the world, and I think 2020 had been an inflection point where software had that uptake, and a lot of early stage entrepreneurs who've come up in spite of the COVID era. But do you think entrepreneurship is dying right now?
Yeah, it's not even really a think. It's not a think question, right? I mean, the data show that it's absolutely dying. And I think that what's inherent in your question is one of the things that we talk about a lot in the book, which is that our perception of entrepreneurship has been overtaken by a very narrow slice of entrepreneurship, which is technology entrepreneurship, which is thriving. But it's thriving only in some very specific places. And Elizabeth and I argue in the book that that's really detrimental to the overall economic dynamism of the overall entrepreneurial economy. Only about 1% of businesses take money from venture capital. And they're important businesses, and it's a lot of money, right? So these are platform businesses that in many cases help enable other businesses, but most actual new businesses are users of technology, but not producers of technology, right? They're restaurants, they're corner stores, they're fitness businesses, health and beauty, and those are the businesses that people are starting. And incidentally, those are also the businesses that were most likely to be harmed by the COVID economic crisis. And so, there's a real problem that's been unseen, really, in the United States and globally, but the book focuses more on the U.S. economy, which is that entrepreneurship absolutely is dying, and we don't notice it because what we've decided is entrepreneurial is distinctly, it's this one little section of entrepreneurship, and it's distinctly it's sort of the antithesis of how we used to describe entrepreneurship, which was much more broad-based.
Got it. And do you think it's because of the 2008 recession era is because the entrepreneurship is dying slowly in US, or do you think it's been a lot of sub factors, especially or what has happened in the last 10 years, especially with COVID and technology being such a it has been a force with which a lot of funding has happened there. Why do you think in the last 10 to 20 years, entrepreneurship would be done?
So it's actually a longer trend. Entrepreneurship in the United States has been declining for 4 decades. And there are a lot of different theories about why that is. One aspect of it, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor puts out the theory that in the developed world, in the US and Europe, people just have many more choices, right? They don't have to go into business. And so why do it when you can get a much easier and safer corporate job? Now, I think that there's a lot of kind of assumptions in that which aren't necessarily true. Corporate jobs aren't nearly as good or pleasant or secure as they once were. But it does click with part of the other thing that we found when we were researching the book, which is that the people who are most entrepreneurial today are women and people of color in the United States who have a less comfortable perch in the corporate world. There are other reasons that we believe entrepreneurship is declining. There's been a kind of mindset shift in the United States so that people are more averse to risk. Young people aren't starting businesses as much as they used to. That's going on at the same time. And then also Seth and I believe, and we also believe this is the fastest way to restore entrepreneurship. But if you really look at the finance system for small business, it is broken. There's been a major consolidation in the banking sector that, combined with the rise of the new builders, means that startups today, companies outside that tiny narrow slice in the tech world, the rest of the world of entrepreneurship doesn't get nearly the amount of funding or mentorship or networking support that it needs.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think you made some very interesting points, especially with women and people of color, starting out more businesses. Do you also think they're the fastest, growing group of entrepreneurs around there?
Yeah, again, the data are clear on this, right? I mean, and this is surprising to a lot of people. I mean, the truth is that the fastest growing groups of new entrepreneurs are women and people of color. And in fact, actually, Elizabeth just wrote this in her Forbes column yesterday. Really good article that parsed through a bunch of data around who's been starting businesses and comes to the conclusion that actually white men are the minority now of business owners, which is also something that I think people find very surprising. And in fact, when Elizabeth and I initially did the research on the book, and we took our findings to friends and just sort of said, "Hey, this is what we're finding. What do you think?" And most of them just didn't believe us. And we had to actually show them the source data and say, no, this is actually what's happening. And to their credit, there are a few reporters for the New York Times and elsewhere that, have picked up on these trends over time. But it just doesn't get written about because it's not as sexy to talk about, entrepreneurship is dying as it is to talk about, the next Silicon Valley unicorn and, so-and-so became a billionaire because of their technology business. And that, I mean, that's great, right? Good for them. And hopefully they'll do some good with that money and, maybe start some other businesses. But the truth is our economy needs a broad set of companies to be successful. And, we've stopped producing successful companies at the rate that we used to.
Right. But when it comes to funding for early stage entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs are not getting that kind of funding. But do you believe in your research, women, especially women-led CEOs, they make up not more than 9 to 10% of the entire funding, especially when it comes to technology companies. But do you think that research is correct, or do you think there has been an uptick of women entrepreneurs getting funded, especially when it comes to tech companies?
It's like it all boils down to this fundamental misperception that people have that the entire universe of entrepreneurship is tech entrepreneurship. Yeah. And really, you've got to find another lens to look at this problem. And in the US especially, and I think globally, there's a version of this that's true. In the US, the lens you have to look at it through is race. That's our original sin. And it's just always about race. And then globally, I think the lens you have to look at it through is women, right? And that also holds true in the US. And so within the tech space, there is a tiny number of women, especially women of color, who get funded by the venture capital system. So that is a problem. that number is growing. There's been a ton of attention paid to that, right? Like Melinda Gates is on the forefront of, trying to make sure that women get their fair share of venture money. And that's an issue. That's a problem. And but the bigger and broader problem is that women who want to start businesses of all kinds don't get the funding they need. And people of color don't get the funding they need. So to focus only on the tech economy and the trends within that is somewhat harmful. It is harmful to the conversation we need to have about how to create a just and better functioning economy in the US. And I think there are versions of this that play out around the world. And in fact, I'll just Seth and I have already talked about doing an international version of the New Builders, because I think so many of these trends play out in different ways.
Okay, interesting. And especially, when it comes to entrepreneurship, you rightly pointed out that, it's been there in the major cities, but do you think after 2020, after what has happened from COVID, do you think the next wave of entrepreneurship will come from smaller cities or in, mid-sized cities as well?
Well, entrepreneurship is becoming increasingly concentrated, right? I mean, and this was not true 30 or 40 years ago. It is true now that again, thinking about entrepreneurship broadly, net new business starts are highly concentrated in 5 cities. And that's a problem, right? And we're talking about the US here. I hope it'll become a bit more broad-based, but I think it's not going to become more broad-based unless we actually help it become more broad-based. And I'm not talking about, tech workers in San Francisco now being able to work from Boise, Idaho. That's great too, and it's fantastic for Boise's economy. But I'm talking about sort of net new businesses starting. So again, back to the corner shops and the the delis and the restaurants and the people that cut your hair. Like those are the workhorses, if you will, camels as we call them, of the entrepreneurial economy. And finding ways to make their success more broad-based rather than highly specialized or highly concentrated in these 5 cities. That's kind of the call to action, the call to arms of the book.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna add to that and say that that I think it's really too soon to talk about the effect of COVID on the entrepreneurial economy. It's like we're in this moment in time when everybody is making all these predictions, and I've long since learned as a journalist, right, that if you're making predictions at this phase, you're just almost always wrong. So, I do and have witnessed that there's kind of a mindset shift that's coming about because of COVID, but I think, and that is more entrepreneurial. In fact, there's just new research on the fact that young people are now having a different motivation when they start their businesses, that it's less about, I want to be my own boss, which was what was true for my generation, and more about, I want to make an impact on the world. And that, if you think about it, is tremendous. So to find ways to support that in the communities where people understand the problems of their communities could be an immensely powerful thing.
Yeah, interesting. And do you think it's mostly the Gen Zs and the millennials who are starting these businesses because I think they feel they need to give back more to the society and they want to make an impact, or are you seeing some different trends over there?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the dangerous things that's going on is that entrepreneurship is somewhat concentrated in terms of in the high income brackets, right? The high wealth brackets. And we cite some studies in the book that describe this, and it shouldn't be the purview of the wealthy. I mean, what's ironic is in the book we describe a number of people, including one entrepreneur who's probably the one we feature the most, who started their business on essentially nothing, right? This woman who started a business on $37 worth of food stamps. Incredible story, incredibly compelling. But the truth is that people who are starting businesses are more likely to be wealthy because they have the backstop for it. And one of the things we talk about in the book is the book is not particularly political, but we do talk about the need for a social backstop, the degrading of the social safety net in the States, and this attachment we have between healthcare and workplace, these are impediments to entrepreneurial activity, right? And in some respects, the most capitalist thing we could do as a country would be to adopt, a healthcare coverage for all and to strengthen the social safety net a little bit, because the consequences of failure, especially at the lower income levels, the lower wealth levels, are significant. And we know with absolute certainty that's an impediment to entrepreneurial activity in the U.S.
Right.
Yeah, one of the things that is so interesting as we get out to talk about the book is that there's this tendency right now in the world, Seth might disagree with me on this, but I think there's a tendency that actually comes from this period of very rapid technological advance we've made. People want to break everything down and categorize and segment everything, which means that we're missing a lot of the big picture, right? So our book is very holistic, and we talk to people and they want to break it down and say, well, this is the one answer, or this is the clear-cut solution. And we got to take a step back from that, right? Because the truth is much more complicated. These problems are nuanced, and you have to look at it through a wider and more holistic lens if you're really going to make progress. So I find myself, not in this interview, but in others, like sort of fighting against that tendency to want to split it, right? To want to divide the problem up. And it's really not dividable.
Right. And, you talked about people of color, women, and, people who have more wealth who are starting new businesses. But, I somehow feel that there's a bit of an ageism in sometimes tech companies, but do you see a younger generation, coming up with starting new businesses, or are you seeing even people into their 40s and 50s, starting businesses and getting help?
The fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in the US are people over 55. So there are, and that is something that, again, I mean, really everything we wrote about surprised people, which is, I think, why the book is catching so much attention right now. But in particular, I think people don't see that because they, when you see or hear stories of tech founders in particular, you think of, the white male hoodie wearing, 20-something, maybe college dropout. And that's not true in terms of entrepreneurship writ large. It's also not really true in terms of who's starting technology businesses. The average age of a technology founder is 40. So it's 40 still pretty young, but it's not, not the 20-something college dropout that many people think that it is. And I think, again, we don't tend to have structures for supporting older entrepreneurs in the same way that we have structures supporting younger entrepreneurs. And I do think that there's a lot of age bias in Silicon Valley. We've got some quotes from various, sort of luminaries in the technology world, talking about how, founders over 32, should go look elsewhere. Like if I see someone who's older than that, I just don't think that they kind of have the chops. I don't know that those particular investors that we quote, that their track records would suggest that they really don't invest in founders that are over 32, but even that they're willing to go on the public record and talk about that suggests that they're willing to perpetuate a really dangerous myth of who is starting businesses today.
Right, and you talked about founders who are starting businesses like saloons and restaurants and all that. What can be done to support such entrepreneurs? I understand in the tech world you have accelerators and funds and mentors who are trying to help out these founders. But what are some of the ways in which such entrepreneurship can be given forward to?
Yeah, so it's like you hit on exactly one of the things we write about in the book. There's a chapter in our book called A Secret of Silicon Valley, which is, we think that Silicon Valley does do some things really well. And one of them is coming up with this concept for accelerators and incubators. And if we can take that idea and spread it to other parts of the economy and support other different kinds of founders, we think that could be incredibly powerful. And I just want to say, that on one hand, we hit this wall of like disbelief in Silicon Valley and among the VC world and among the tech journalists that I know, when we came to them with the conclusions of our book. But one of the other great gifts of Silicon Valley and the tech world is that they kind of let go of stuff pretty fast. So they're like, oh, well, we were wrong. Let's, and now we found a great reception in that world of people who are saying, okay, I looked at the data, you're right. Now what do we do to help the rest of the founders? And that's pretty cool. I mean, I love that. I don't know, Seth, if you've been feeling that too, but just the reception we've been getting in the tech world for the idea of broadening the concept of entrepreneurship is heartening. So my hope particularly is that, people will step forward and figure out how to do this.
I think that's right, Elizabeth. And I think it's, this is in part why you and I decided to write the book, right? Was that we have platforms and credibility inside that community to be able to say, hey, this thing is going on and it's time to pay attention to it. And I think, I've been really happy with how that's resonated with people. And I think one of our challenges or one of our calls here is to now we're getting great reception inside the tech community, inside the business community. Now we need to expand that. How do we get that to the policy community? How do we get that to the, to Americans writ large?
Right. And how about the unbundling of university? Do you think that's going to happen where, students are not supposed to study 4 years, but maybe do a course in how to be a great hairdresser or something like that, which is useful for people who want to start entrepreneurship? Or do you think it's going to be something like what Lambda School is doing? Like it's a 4-month course, but it's really revolutionized the education industry and what Y Combinator is doing. Do you think such sort of initiatives should also be taken?
Oh yeah, I have not heard that term before, but I like it. The unbundling of the university. Yeah. Actually, I just know a friend of mine who's he's doing economic development in Kentucky, just took a year-long course from Stanford called Be a Disruptor, like in her, to her world, right? And I thought, wow, well, that sounds pretty cool. I should mention, so yeah, I think like that is a phenomenal idea and a great trend, actually. There are probably some counters to that, but I'll just say on the whole, I think that's a great trend. And I should mention here that one of the organizations, and Seth knew of them first, is called E4All that we write about in the book, Entrepreneurship for All, which is exactly an accelerator for the kinds of founders we're talking about. So that this movement is going on. It's just too small right now. It's too small. And that course, it's probably important to think about like who really can reach the communities we're talking about, right? And I'm not sure that a Stanford can really connect very well with the Dominican community in Massachusetts, right? That's kind of another area of conversation, but grassroots efforts are probably the most valuable thing that could go on now.
Agreed, absolutely.
Yeah.
Got it. And do you think the government should also step in and encourage some sort of initiative?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we are. I mean, we don't generally look to the government for sort of the answers, but they can be part of the answer. And we talk about a few public-private partnerships in the book, which are very successful models where public money spurs additional private money. I mean, it's set up to do that. So I think there's some opportunities there. There's definitely an opportunity for the government to think about the role it plays in impeding entrepreneurship. You mentioned hairdressers and things like that. The number of professions that require hyper local certifications, which really make no sense, right? I mean, but if I can be a hairdresser in Longmont, Colorado, why can't I be a hairdresser in Boise? I can't right now. I'd have to go through a totally separate certification process. And I think COVID kind of laid bare that there are some holes like that in our systems that we need to think about differently. So I think there's some things the government could do to back off. We talk also a lot about kind of what's been the overregulation of the banking sector, which has led to this dangerous consolidation of banks, particularly smaller banks, community banks. So there's plenty of things the government could do to maybe even get out of the way of entrepreneurship. But I think one of the things we caution about is that oftentimes when government does get involved with what they think of as the innovation economy, they think of it in terms of how do they support venture and the venture model. And that's not a great role for government, in part because the venture model is not a particularly good way of promoting broad-based economic development. And so, we would encourage people to think more broadly about, who are policymakers, to think more broadly about the impact that government can have, and focus it on not the areas of the innovation economy that are working and getting lots of money, but the areas of the innovation economy that are being left behind.
Got it. I quickly want to do the top three. What's your favorite business book?
Oh, favorite business book. That's a good question.
Other than The New Builders.
Yeah.
Yes. So I particularly love Winning the Loser's Game, which is by my friend Charlie Ellis, because I think this is all related, right? But building wealth via investments, building wealth via businesses. I just think being secure with the way that you handle money is really important. So that I'll mention that one.
I'm a big fan of Startup Communities. My business partner, Brad Feld, wrote it. I think it's fantastic. It describes a lot about sort of community-based action. So I'd be loath not to recommend that.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put that in the show notes. And, if you could go back in time when you started writing the book, what is the one thing you would have focused on or done anything differently?
Oh, good question. Seth, do you want to take that? Because I know you need to jump off.
Yeah, I don't know that there is anything I would have done differently. I mean, the truth is that I'm really happy with the way that the book came out. And I think the timing turned out to be unbelievable. I mean, it just, thank God that we had already done the research for it and we could write it really quickly. I mean, I suppose if I could have done anything, I would have started a year early, because we compressed what is normally an 18-month to 2-year writing timeline. We compressed it into 6 months, and that was just a huge amount of work. But other than that, we did that because it was so timely. We knew we needed to get it out.
Yeah, and I say I don't really have anything to add to that. I'm very proud of writing The New Builders. It's really one of the best things I've done in my work life up till now.
Awesome. And just the last one, do you have any favorite online tools, for example, Gmail, Slack, Zoom?
So right before this call, I was doing a helpful call with Superhuman, which is an app that Seth turned me on to, which I really love. So.
Yeah. I think we had Vivek from Superhuman. That's a great tool. Set any other tool that you want to recommend?
Yeah, well, I use Voxer a lot, which is this sort of voicemail app. I love it. You can leave asynchronous voicemails, but my calendar is booked all day, every day.
Right.
And it's really hard sometimes and what I found is that a lot of conversations that people think they need to have, sort of directly, but they can't be done over email, can actually be done in Voxer, where you just leave each other these little voice snippets, and you can make a lot of progress quickly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll put that in the show notes. Elizabeth said, what is the best way people can reach out to you and know more about the new book, The New Builders?
We have a website, www.thenewbuilders.com. You can buy the book through that website, and there's independent bookstore links where you can buy the book through them too.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us. I really enjoyed my conversation with you guys.
Thank you. It was really
Thank you, Rohit. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.